One. Well, hello. Welcome to part 3 of Being a Good Samaritan with Victims. My name is Reba Collins, and I work with the West Ohio Conference of the United Methodist Church. And our presenters today, Jami Nathan and Karri Lewis, serve on our All-In Community team. And so today we're just going to be walking through several things that talk about and developing tools and resources and practices for this ministry with victims. And so we're going to revisit some things that actually we've done over the course of this whole year with our Every Second Saturday series. And then we're also going to bring forward some new resources and some new tools to help us do this work. So good morning and welcome. And we are just really excited to get going. So Jami and Karri, would you just like to say a few words? And then I believe Jami is going to start us out with some discussion.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's great to see everyone again. Looking forward to today. And we've got some new concepts, I think, that everyone will really appreciate as you go forward in your individual ministries.
Good morning, everybody. So glad to see you all. Thanks for being here. This is very near and dear to my heart, ministry, and I really think these 3 sessions we've had are able to fully equip us to really walk alongside others and be patient with the process.
All right. So we're going to start out, as always, with some group discussion.
Yes. I believe you were sent in your reminder email a couple of questions to think about as you came to get today, kind of put you in the right frame of mind of where we're headed for our discussions. So the first one I'd like to get some initial feedback on is, what makes you feel safe? Emotionally, physically, spiritually, relationally, all within a community. I'll pause for a second so everyone can think through that a moment. What makes you feel safe?
I think for me, feeling safe in community is knowing, when I think physically safe, it's kind of the predictability, right? Knowing what's around the corner, knowing what is happening, just kind of that predictability and consistency. And I think that's also, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally as well, just consistency and knowing what to expect.
Thank you.
I can piggyback off of that question, Jami and Reba. I think when it comes to emotionally and spiritually, for me is realizing, one, that I am on my own journey and someone is on their own faith journey as well. But consistency is huge. And I think in that, for me personally, that can affect all of these: emotionally, physically, spiritually, relationally. And also when someone listens well, I feel seen and heard.
That one's a big one for me, is the listening. Being able to say what I'm thinking or feeling, or a comment about my space, and having that heard, my comments heard by someone, helps to create that comfort, that warm hug, whether it is literally physical or if it's just mentally and emotionally feeling safe within a relationship, within a community as a whole, walking into a church community specifically. Anyone else?
Jami, your comment about the physical and the hug reminded me of respect of my boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that goes along with understanding what those are, but just, having, and also recognizing and seeing in community that other people's boundaries are being respected. When another person's boundaries are violated, then I feel that too. That makes me feel less safe and less trusting. So boundaries, I think, are and having that common expectation of relational patterns and boundaries and those kind of things, I think, are, for me, that really is impactful.
Comment.
I'm so speechless this morning. Unusual for me, but
Well, we're heading into a session where some of these things are very deep concepts. We've been building through the other two sessions towards this third session, that it really is going to be dealing with some deepness in our emotional and mental state that we haven't been before. So that's understandable if you're a little speechless. So to continue with that, how do we as a community respond when someone we know has been harmed or experienced pain from a broken relationship?
I think we use our empathy to feel their pain and know how to help that person. I'm continually doing this with my grandchildren who have been harmed by the fact that their father was in prison and their mother has left, and it's a mess.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of get in, my antenna goes up to see exactly how things are, to kind of see the atmosphere and feel the atmosphere. So that's one big thing, my antenna. I got that.
I love that you mentioned. I love that you mentioned your antenna. My husband used me in an example for a sermon week before last, and I had a parishioner come up last week and sit down with me at the breakfast and say how moved she was by some of my actions that he had referred to in the sermon, because she realized that she had been creating harm to other people by giving off a platitude and whatnot in a situation, and she valued what he had to say because she finally heard it and could put it to use right away, that she was harming people and didn't realize it. That her antenna was up and more sensitive to those types of things. So that touched my heart.
Yeah, because the reality is that things are not always that way, that sometimes people are judgmental. They think that it's your fault. Or they're afraid that something like that might happen to them, and they kind of just want to essentially push you aside.
Yeah. Whew, that's a big one right there. Or I did this question with another group of criminal justice professionals, and somebody wrote in the comments, silent acquiescence. Not saying anything at all, not responding in any way
I can see that.
at all.
Yeah, that's it. Wow. Yeah.
And so when we think about what Barb said about that empathy and that antenna versus, as Vivian just said, almost like victim blaming, right? Or not saying anything at all, which one leads towards healing? Which one leads towards harm? Further harm.
Empathy.
Yeah, the empathy does. I mean, if we respond with nothing but empathy, we have set a different course for individuals, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Good discussion. So today we're going to actually dig into how can we be ready to respond with empathy and understanding, even in the face of situations that perhaps we're not even or that come at us, right? So today we're going to explore that hidden impact of victimization and learn to recognize some of the signs of it. That's that antenna. I love that image, that antenna that Barb talked about. So so much of the impact is hidden, and we're going to show you a great visual on to help you kind of solidify that image in your mind. But so much of what happens with victimization is under the surface, right? So we're going to learn some key insights for addressing those healing blockers of trauma and shame, some new things that are going to help support resiliency, learn those key skills and competency for supporting all of that, learn also skills and competencies for creating non-judgmental encounters for relational woundedness to be minimized, revealed, and healed, right? How do we not do victim shaming? Because a lot of the times, as Vivian said, that reaction, we do that because we want to push it away from us. We don't want to think about that could be us at any given time. And, we as human beings, our natural inclination is to protect ourselves first. And sometimes that looks like pushing away individuals who have been hurt. And then leave with key resources for continued learning and growth. So those are our objectives for today. And so we're going to just kind of start out with this iceberg, and Karri's going to kind of walk us through this, the affect and impact of being like an iceberg.
Thank you, Reba. Have any of you ever seen this image before? You can give me a thumbs up or a nod of the head. Yes. Well, I think me personally, I've seen it quite a bit, and I really like how when we think about the affect and impact, first of all, so we see the top of the iceberg, what's visible to us, and what it looks like. And how it's different person to person. We can see their responses, we can see interactions, we can see visible wounds, right? So, just one of those things to think about, the visible parts, the severity of the wound. And so that's what we mostly see when we're working with other people. A lot of times, however, we don't think about what's underneath the iceberg that we don't see, and what comes to mind there is a lot of the emotional aspect of everything, the emotional effects of when someone has been victimized. A lot of that, that unhealed stuff, the unhealed trauma can come out, and then it is visible. And, a lot of times that can be confusing, if we're walking alongside someone, we don't know how that might manifest in their visible, so it is, the severity of things, the type of the wound, the past hurts, anything present that can trigger the past, and I think that's something to keep in mind, at the forefront as well. We think that there might be some trauma that people have worked through. Even the victim might think that they've worked through that, and it may present itself again. There we go. So the impact, you can think about the physical and financial. That could be something that is present. That could be something that is lasting. I know that we've mentioned before, and we'll mention again another resource that we have with the body keeps a score. And a lot of times that, we think of the mind and the body and how trauma can have that physical impact on that. And then again, what Reba just brought up, the sense of safety. I think that personally can be something that can be long-term, and I think that's why it's so important for us to ask those difficult questions, right, Barb? For us to really reflect on, to where we can relate with empathy, what makes us feel safe, and a lot of times a sense of self, after someone's been victimized, I think we can all relate to a time where we've been victimized a time, and we ask those questions. Who am I? Why did this happen? And then placing the shame and the blame on ourselves as well. That can definitely be prevalent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, it's really hard when you think about that loss of worldview. And in some of our previous sessions, we talked about how particularly a traumatic victimization calls into questions all of these things, the safety of people, who am I, where was God, all of those things. So oftentimes when that loss of worldview is shattered, that's just swirling in the person underneath the surface. And the more we can lean into that empathy, the more we can lean into understanding and just listen. And not how do we make these things under the waterline, right, visible, is through that relationship.
Absolutely.
And just listening. And listening not just to what that person is saying, but listening between the lines of what they're saying, because they might be all over the place, right? And so how do we recognize that for what it is as to what's swirling under the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg. And with some of the things we're going to be talking about today will help us surface those things and help us to know how to respond in a way to where they can keep bringing those up. Because part of the healing is helping the victim to move what's under the waterline to the surface so that they can see it and view and reconstruct it accordingly. So, all right. So what we have to recognize is our victim identities are really intersectional. And remember, we talked about in previous sessions, there is no perfect victim because there's all this other stuff, right? So Jami's going to kind of talk a little bit more about this.
I think intersectionality is, it seems to be a new concept that's talked about in our world, but yet it's not a new concept. Kimberly Crenshaw brought it to us back in the late 80s, early 90s, where she was dealing with Black women in court cases, that they come to the table wearing many different hats. And that's kind of how, when you think about it, you look at a person and how that person is made up represents their race, their gender, their socioeconomic backgrounds. And that's just the beginning. That's the tip of the iceberg. Those are the things that you can look at and see right away. But then you come in and you bring everything else that creates the person that you're looking at. So intersectionality is big because it's that level of emotional and spiritual impact that you don't see right away, but the person is bringing to the table, the person is bringing to the conversation, bringing to any situation. So being aware that just because you look at somebody, you don't see all the hats that they're wearing, and they may be putting on one hat and have taken another one off to try and focus in from that viewpoint, to have a discussion.
Intersectionality also reminds us that we bring our own intersectionality, right, to this relationship. And so, we are each a cultural being, our own cultural being based on all these different dynamics. And so how you would respond in the same situation will not be how that other person responds. So how the person that you are with, how their journey of healing is going to unfold may not be the same as your journey of healing. So I think that's the whole point, is that, you know, we all have these identities that we bring. And so, as we're going to talk about a little bit later, we've got to be very self-aware in order to do this work at a very deep level. So we're going to kind of look actually at intersectionality through this healing blocker of trauma, right? And we've used this quote before from Dr. Judith Herman: the traumatic events destroy the victim's fundamental assumptions about safety of the world, the positive view of the self, and the meaningful order of creation. So that's all below that waterline of the iceberg, right? It's that bottom part of the iceberg, which are the big pieces that we need to take into consideration. So we've talked about trauma in the past, but we've found some new things that maybe or visually help you kind of really look at it even more broadly than the small scope that we have looked at. And so Karri's going to just kind of walk us through some of this stuff.
Thank you, Reba. Has anyone here ever heard of the adverse childhood experiences? Or I know that, you know, when Reba sent out the email, there was a link. I don't know if anybody had the time or the opportunity to take a quick test. It's just a quick overview of how things that we experience, or, you know, folks, all of us really experience in childhood, and how those can take effect today. You know, some of the things here that to take a good look at, you know, when you count up the score of the total of your ACEs test, it can really paint a picture as to the severity of, I don't want to say severity of trauma, but it helps paint us a picture, right? It, you know, it really kind of ties things together. And like I said, if you didn't have a chance, or if you did have a chance, some of the things here in the orange block, you know, each question is a point. So you add it up and how that is related to someone today, from based off their childhood. So witnessing a family member being abused, seeing violence outside the home, you know, living in a war zone. Another question, I believe, is if you have someone who is incarcerated, an incarcerated relative in your family. You know, of course, did you witness your mother or your father being physically abused? You know, is there a mental health issue, you know, within the family dynamic? You know, divorce and substance abuse. So I think this tool in itself is used quite a bit in the area, in the arena of, you can think of substance use disorder. You can take a look at domestic violence victims. A lot of times, I don't want to say a lot of times and paint that and, you know, that stereotype, but a lot of times, people who find themselves in an abusive relationship they have a high ACE score per se. A lot of folks who are incarcerated also have a very high ACE score. So that really helps us. I think this is a great tool to see what people have really experienced in their life, and it kind of paints a picture of how we can help them walk through these traumas per se, or what they've been experienced to.
Mm-hmm. And I think too that, again, this is a tool of helping us help others to understand maybe why they're having certain reactions. If they are an adult who's been victimized, right, and they just can't understand why they are reacting so strongly to certain things. You know, a lot of people, this is relatively new. ACEs is a relatively new research. It only came out in the last 10 years. Because actually it was a pharmaceutical company who commissioned the research to understand why certain individuals had adult ailments, physical ailments primarily is kind of how it started. And they were able to trace it back to these particular things that happened in their childhood that were unresolved. right? And I think that's a key thing, is that some people may experience these, but if they have gotten the help and have been able to resolve the childhood experience during childhood or youth time, then it's not carried forward as much as, but we have a lot of adults that are walking around with this kind of experience from their childhood that has never been named and has never been connected to how they are currently functioning as adults. So, the more explicit we can be, the more we can show people, hey, maybe, if somebody's asking, why am I reacting this way? I don't understand what's going on with myself. This is a neutral way of bringing up maybe that there was some trauma that has been unresolved in their life.
Yeah. And I like here at the bottom of the workbook, there's a quote that summarizes it very well. What we suppress today will be expressed in greater ways in later days.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Kind of ties it in there, doesn't it? And then with this, I think we just wanted to have you all take a look at the different types of trauma. And
yeah, so this is just a little deeper understanding of what trauma is. And again, it's a way for you to kind of do some of your own evaluation. Again, it helps your antenna to get stronger. A stronger reception. I'm going to use that, Barb, your antenna metaphor. It helps us to get a stronger reception of what is maybe underneath that waterline with folks.
Yeah, and the 3 types of trauma. This is an excellent, I'll just plug this in. This website that is referenced here is an absolutely wonderful tool for anybody who's worked with folks with substance use disorder or a substance use history, as well as challenges with mental health. So just wanted to plug that in right there, but this really helps tie in the 3 types of trauma. When you think of trauma, we can think of the event within itself, and sometimes, to also keep in mind that victims, we don't have to know the details of their event for us to be able to help them. I heard that the other day, and that really just kind of stuck with me. We don't have to know details. Is it a need to know? Again, or is it a want to know? That was something that was embedded in my brain with clinical training in college. So I wanted to pass that along as well. And their experience of the trauma, is how they determine if it's traumatic, again, that it points back to them. And how they view it, and to keep that in mind, our perceptions are different. We all are uniquely walking through this. And then the effects, I know we've touched base on those, and how that affects us physically, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. But again, that is an excellent website for tools.
So we're going to do just a little group discussion again. So what are some red signals that there's more that is underneath the surface, and that not everything is fine, right? Many of us, we try and be empathetic, right? Whenever we know something, when we know something has happened and we're like, oh, we're so sorry. And, how are you doing? Always the question, how are you doing? I'm fine. Right. But, going back to Barb's antenna thing, what are some of the signals that you get with your antenna that you've experienced perhaps where you're like, they're really not that fine? So this is just some real world observations from the group.
I would say tears. A lot of tears.
Barb, can you say that again? You kind of cut out.
Oh, okay. Yes, I would say when tears come up suddenly and you hit a nerve.
Mm. Yep.
Jawline.
Oh.
Do they, how is their jawline reacting before they say something? Usually goes along with saying, I'm fine,
Mhm.
I'm fine. How they say that makes a difference.
Mhm.
Something else that I just came to mind that I forgot about, really when you pay attention to a person's body language, a lot of times when people try to suppress emotion, they swallow.
Mm.
They swallow in order to try to push the emotion down, or they swallow a lot when talking about something uncomfortable because they're afraid of the emotional response.
Mm.
Subconsciously, when they cross their legs or their arms too,
Mm-hmm.
because they're putting up that barrier, that physical protection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or they look away.
Mm-hmm.
We look away, right? We don't want to make eye contact. We don't want to connect, right? Anything that signals disconnection from you. Stepping back.
So they're letting you know they don't want to continue the conversation down that route.
Yes, quickly switching. I'm sorry, Vivian, what did you say?
So they clearly don't want to carry on that conversation down that particular route.
Right. So when we're in those situations, right, sometimes I think part of it is when we ask, how are you really doing? If there's a whole group of people around, probably not the best. So sometimes I think whenever we look at red signals, we know that there's more underneath that, but then we have to figure out when's the appropriate time to address that. Right. So, good. So recognizing signs of trauma, right? Because we've talked about there's no perfect victim. They may vacillate. One time they may say they're fine, but then the next time they're agitated when you ask, how are you really doing? They may say, well, I'm just dealing with it. And then the next time they're like, I'm falling apart. So we need to just pay attention to, is there any consistency that's starting to come up or not? Whenever there's a crime involved, which a lot of times there are, they're delay reporting the offense, may be inconsistent and unpredictable, often feel threatened, manipulate. Even just asking the question may feel like manipulation to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're afraid to talk, reluctant to report, maybe conflicted. So, recognizing signs of trauma is that there's no consistency in what's happening. All right. So I think we just want to, on this part, is just to kind of walk through some of these slides, just so that you are aware of some of the red signals: hypervigilance, intuition, creativity, memories, isolation. So these are ways that you know that people are trying to adapt to something that has been traumatic to them. Remember, because in the 3 E's, the person determines if they have experienced trauma or not. But here are some of the things that you can look for as individuals walk through their journey, that show you that they are being adaptive to a traumatic experience. They may say, oh, I haven't experienced any trauma, but if they become hypervigilant, that means otherwise, right? If they're going home, well, why'd you do that? Well, I went home, I locked my doors, or they haven't come out of their house because they're too afraid to. So these can be good in adaptive, and they can be not so healthy. I guess healthy and unhealthy in how people adapt. Okay. Any thoughts on these?
Well, I think when you get into like creativity and memories as well, you know, if you've experienced trauma, you may have some short-term memory because your mind is trying to block it out, which can carry over into being stifled to think creatively about how to go through normal life, and being with other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So on the slide that it says creativity, does that mean that they become more creative, or their creativity is blocked? How do you interpret that?
It could be either.
Okay.
It could be either in how they and when we think of creativity, it's not so much in task creativity as is in how do I begin to reform my world creativity. And it could be negative in that way, or it could be a positive. It's about kind of integrating that traumatic experience into a new kind of worldview, into a new identity.
Okay, so it could be somebody saying, because this happened to me, I'm just worthless, and this is punishment for that.
Could be.
Anything better than that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
On a positive aspect, it could be somebody who what they've gone through has helped them see the need that needs to be. So being creative and reaching out and trying to build a bridge to save other people from going through what they went through.
Right.
As another way, a positive way for creativity.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. And then we know when people aren't healed, aren't working through the healing from trauma, sometimes their adaptive behavior, again, it becomes negative, right? They can be creative in thinking of reasons why not to go to work, right? Or they can be creative in thinking of new work that is to come from that, right? So here again, we just want you to kind of sit with this for a minute, and then, you know, think of, are there questions? Are there any things that come to mind for you? Do the physical and mental pieces, does that surprise anybody? That's how trauma, again, the body knows, do any of those, are those surprising to any of you?
No, I do think that there's one that's kind of missing that unfortunately is coming to light more and more is self-harm, like cutting. We had two members in a congregation before, youth, who were cutting themselves based on some past experiences. So that one isn't one that's really talked about much, but it is becoming more prevalent in our society. Not so much for as adults, but as teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Karri, you that said in our session, in our planning session, to define trauma as it is when the body cannot cope. What was that?
Oh, what was that? Hold on. I just found it. Trauma is anything that overwhelms the brain's ability to cope, anything that is too much, too soon, or too fast.
Say that again, please.
Absolutely. Trauma is anything that overwhelms the brain's ability to cope, anything that is too much, too soon, or too fast.
Mm-hmm. So getting back to the cutting, I know from a friend whose granddaughter has recently expressed herself through that. And she was reading that in the cutting, that is one of the ways that somebody feels that they can get control.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel in control then, and they feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so from Karri's, explanation of that, in many ways, that makes sense as an expression.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because everything else, too much, too soon, too fast, right? That's so out of control. Does that not? I mean, whenever we experience something that's too soon, it's out of our control. We don't know how to, right? And all those things. So, yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on this? This is group learning today. All right. So what can we do in the face of trauma? What are some basic things that we are able to do? And so Jami's going to take us through these.
One of the first things you can do is treat everyone with a universal precaution. And that stems back from, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. What's under the surface, we're not aware of yet. So treating everyone with respect and caution helps them to walk into the space a little bit better. And with that, creating a welcoming environment that promotes feelings of safety and nonviolence. So when you're trying to create a space for people to feel joyous and engaging, be aware of what's going on in the room. Sometimes, people like music. Well, how loud is the music? What type of music? Be attentive to the lighting. Is it too much light? Is there strobe lights? What's going on to make people come into a space that you may not be aware of? And the strobe lighting may not be something active, like at a party or something, but it could be flickering lights because the light bulbs are going out too. Creating a warm environment and being aware of everyone's personal space. I know right now we are very aware of personal space due to the pandemic. Being aware that there is places for people to sit, but yet maybe not too close together, or groups and families, makes it welcoming, as well as giving them their space and their control over their area. Recognizing that certain practices may create trauma or trigger traumatic memories. I'll come back to this in just a little bit, but make a commitment to being nonviolent in words, in actions, in policies and practices. Just, being aware is the biggest starting point with that.
Mm-hmm. And I will say too, I'll give a personal example of the awareness of personal space. So my daughter has had some physical, medical trauma that has occurred in her life at a very young age. And for a long time, as mama, and when they're suffering, you want to just hug them and hold them close, right? I mean, that to me, that is comforting. And it took me a long time to recognize that when she was in so much pain physically because of medical conditions, hugging hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't soothing at all. So now I pay very close attention to when she comes home, I let her initiate the hugging. And if she doesn't want to hug, if she wants to just kind of hole up, then I know that, she's going through something's been triggered. It could be anxiety. Some people have physical anxiety around that, right? So, again, just being aware that what might be comforting to us, what might feel safe to us, may feel unsafe to the person.
Here supporting meaningful power sharing and decision making. That is all voices. I can't exactly remember what you said earlier, Reba.
Justice is served when all voices are heard.
Yes, that all voices need to be heard, and can take a little bit of time to do, but it's important to take that time in order for it to be effective and everyone feel welcome. Use tools and approach that help calm someone or calm some behavior. I know sometimes when you bring families together, it can be stressful with kids. If the kids get real excited and there's a lot of activity going on, that can trigger another family of that. So just being kind of aware that loud noises and anxious behavior, especially when you're dealing with an intergenerational community, being aware and helping to smooth through that. So it's a little bit more smooth sailing. Understanding that troubling behaviors that we may find uncomfortable, going back to families, sometimes kids have to work it out. But giving them a safe place to go to if kids are reacting and it's triggering other people in a room, allows them some time to regroup themselves to come back into a setting. Showing some general concern and sensitivity, especially when you get into gender and cultural issues. I am a English as a second language teacher, and I deal with a lot of diverse backgrounds in a room, and being open that a lot of the people that I encounter on a daily basis have had trauma in their lives, and being aware of a change in their behavior, but be sensitive to that and allow them to work through some. One example that I have a gal who is from Afghanistan, and as the US was trying to pull out, her mother actually was a person that was shot in trying to leave Afghanistan, and she was there in my class getting the information real time. So stopping for a moment to give her an opportunity to regroup and process that information, and being there, just physically being there with her, was a real switch very quickly, but it was very meaningful to her to have that, created that safe space, and being aware of that. Another one is just helping link a person with other services. We're giving you a lot of information here, and in all the different communities that you represent, there are other resources, and getting in tune with those in order to give some continuity of care when a situation has been brought forward. That's really important. That's really important.
Just for the group, when you look at this list and the one before that, are there any that really are a challenge for you to do? Any that maybe you think, had a little judgment around that? I know that for me, the one about troubling behavior that we may find uncomfortable, right, or that we think is harmful to that individual, not judging that, but recognizing that the person has used that to cope and survive circumstances, right? That there, you know, we know there's better and healthier ways, but that was really helpful to them. And so what do we do normally, right? We set patterns that we find have helped us to survive at the very basic level. So how do we, you know, use our tools and our referrals and all those things to help people see that that coping mechanism is no longer required, that there are better mechanisms available. And then final part there, Jami.
I think this one is a good one to make a note. In a trauma class I took on education, being aware of traumas that come into your classroom, one of the things the presenter talked about, and I've tried to utilize, though it is not easy, is the 30-second rule. That when you ask someone what has happened to you, to wait 30 seconds for a response. And silence is really hard. But it may take them 30 seconds if you're in a nurturing, caring environment where they know you're asking genuinely what happened to you and are waiting to help them. That 30 seconds can be very valuable, not only to the person, but to you in what you are going to receive as a result of that. So in waiting that 30 seconds, it's hard, isn't it? It's hard for us to do, but silence sometimes is the best thing. And that's one of the things in Stephen ministry we are taught, is that silence is okay. It gives the person an opportunity to think through and formulate what they're going to say. Here, beyond just listening and being present, we have given you a couple of responses to encourage them to continue talking to you. Thank you for trusting me with the information that you're telling me. I'm so sorry this has happened. I support you in your healing process. How can I help you in that? Those are things that you can do to make them feel more comfortable and at peace to be able to talk to you and work through some of the things they need to work through.
Yeah. And then the final thing is take care of yourself as well. And know that your presence is enough.
Yes.
All right. Any thoughts or questions before we move on to kind of looking at what's below the waterline there on shame? Anything with trauma? Any additional thoughts or insights?
Yeah, my experience has been that establishing that trust, and in Stephen ministry, we talk a lot about confidentiality and knowing that you're not going to spread that to anybody, except in supervision. Yeah, just building up that sense of trust is key to letting people feel it's okay to tell you these things in the first place.
And going back to the consistency theme that we raised very early on, being consistent in your listening and in your presence, right? Both of those, the listening and that also builds that trust that Vivian was just talking about. So then kind of looking below the waterline with addressing the healing blocker of shame. Again, when somebody is able to tell their story, when we have created that environment, and created that community, and I always say it takes two to create community. So when we have created that community with another person that allows them to tell their story, that is a great way to bring all that shame up above the waterline, so that it can be revealed and it can be addressed. So here's another tool that you can use in helping people to recognize that maybe what they're in is shame, that they're working through some shame. This is the Compass of Shame, adapted by D.L. Nathanson. I first learned of this at a restorative practices conference. And the gentleman who was presenting it, he's a restorative practitioner, and he talked about using this with a young woman that had come to him. He was working in the community, and she had been diagnosed with all kinds of mental illness. She'd been institutionalized. She had been on medication, all these different things, and they were trying to get her right, so that she could be be a functional human being. And when she came to him, she was like at her last straw. And he listened to her story of abuse and neglect and victimization. And then he showed her this, the compass of shame. And he said she just broke down in tears and said, finally, somebody understands me. So this is a great tool to use whenever you start to see those signals, right? When somebody has withdrawn, or they're self-attacking, or they're avoiding, or they're attacking others, if they're moving aggressively in either towards themselves or somebody else, or if they are withdrawing from themselves or somebody else. You can use this, and it is simple to say, this kind of sounds like some shame perhaps is underneath all of this. And you can then just kind of show them this and have them process through it. So it's a great tool to use, again, that makes things explicit. And then just some reminders. We've talked about this before, about moving through shame, these 4 components of shame resilience. Recognizing the shame and understanding its triggers. So the compass of shame is a great way to recognize that somebody's in shame, and then helping them process through their story. Again, sometimes if it's traumatic enough, pieces and parts will come to them as time goes on. So they may have to retell it. They may have to revisit it several times before they get to understanding what their triggers are. And it could be somebody, it could be a word, it could be a phrase, it could be all kinds of things that signal a trigger. And then practicing, and that goes to that practicing the critical self-awareness. What am I feeling? When else have I felt like this? And then kind of unpacking what were some of the common themes that presented themselves when I felt like this before, and why I'm feeling like this now. And then what happened to you recently that caused you to feel this way? Sometimes shame doesn't come out automatically. It's a slow build. It takes a little bit of time. And then reaching out, encouraging them to keep reaching out to you or somebody else. If you're not the right person, maybe you've been triggered by a similar trigger, right? So reaching out maybe to somebody else. It's okay to say that you don't have the emotional capacity because of your own things, right? So you don't do anybody a service if you are trying to wrestle through your own things and help somebody else. So heal thyself first, right? Then speaking shame in confidence. Vivian just mentioned that confidentiality thing doesn't go beyond the two of you unless, again, there is something that the two of you are unable to attend to. And then it's their choice. It is, you have to set your boundaries. We haven't talked a lot about that, but you have to set your boundaries how far you're willing to go. But, it's kind to be clear. So be clear about that as you move forward, and then help with that warm handoff. And also help folks to understand that not everyone has the right to hear another person's shame. Not everybody. So encourage your folks to have to invest and to speak their shame to somebody who's earned that right. And for individuals who have a lot of ACEs in their background, one of the expressions of that trauma is that they tell everybody everything, right? Because they live in that. They live in, and they want everybody else around them to have that anxiety. And so part of the process is helping to work through who really earns the right to hear this story, and that builds that trust. So any thoughts on that, folks? So here again, another tool on restorative practice, affective questions that help folks develop resiliency, help in that healing. So when someone has been hurt and are dealing with this unrecognized shame, what do you think when you realized, what did you think when you realized what happened? This kind of gets to self-regulation as well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that and give you a couple of tools to help you help individuals self-regulate whenever they have experienced something that has brought shame back up or brought trauma back up. But what did you think when you realized what had happened? What have you been thinking or feeling about most often since? That's a great question if somebody comes to you long after a victimization has occurred, right? What impact has this incident had on you and others? That self-awareness, that critical, thinking about self. What has been the hardest thing for you? What do you think needs to happen to make things right? That goes to the justice piece, right? Of, every voice, justice is served when every voice has been heard. Our justice system, if somebody's victimization has landed into the court system, oftentimes the victim's voice is the most suppressed in that process. So part of your work may be in that advocacy through courts. It may not be, but helping them to be able to recognize and feel that they can advocate for what needs to be made right. And what is one thing you can do to keep moving forward? Again, self-agency is really important. So these are great tools to have in your toolbox whenever you are working, these are not a checklist either. You don't just go bam, 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 bam. They come at different times in the process of healing through an experience. Okay. So that's another tool. And so now I think we're going to move into where we kind of actually left off on session 2, and that's creating those safe spaces for exposure and healing. And we've touched on a lot of this already, but here are some other things that, again, this is really layered. There are, again, when we think of that intersectionality of identities and all those kind of things. So how can we kind of, again, make our antennas stronger and our responses more impactful? And so Karri's gonna, I think, Karri, were you gonna walk us through some of this?
I think I was starting to do this, and then we're all just gonna chime in together here, the three of us, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah. So, something just to touch base on what you just shared, Reba, and how, those triggering events, right? These things can come up in a victim's life at any time. It could be 5 years from the event or events. It could be 10 years. It could be 20 years. I can share a little bit, just, recently I was working within an environment where I was emotionally triggered, not by the clients that I was helping, but by the authoritative figure who was my supervisor. So to keep that in mind and how that can play out in our day-to-day lives. And I didn't recognize it at first, So it, it was one of those things, from time with the Lord, and it was just revealed to me then that I was emotionally triggered by that person, just who they were. So to keep that in mind again, and that everybody's walk is different, and these things may present themselves at a certain time. Are you getting feedback, Reba?
I am, yes.
Like, where's that coming from? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I just sent a little chat.
Okay.
Can
Good.
everyone check their mute features? And it's not registering who it is.
I'm not for sure. Interesting. There we go. I don't hear it. Okay,
I think I got
that's
it.
all right. But yeah, creating a safe space, how we show up matters. I think for what I'm seeing, the thread here today is consistency, how we show up. It's again, it's the building trust. Vivian, you mentioned that, and that is an imperative piece of working with others. And really understanding who we are, at our core, and what we bring to the table, our own life experiences, our cultures within our culture, right? And I think that speaks volumes when we're doing this work, and why we're doing this work, and then to understand that ourselves. I think this work really calls us to that deeper level of emotional awareness of who we are. So I think that's very important. And to really reflect, what comes to mind is, how would we want someone to show up for us? So that component of being creative, right? And if we could think back to a time where we needed someone to show up in our lives, and we just didn't receive it, or something along those lines, I think that's very important. And again, also just being aware of others. I know Jami touched base, about what she does, as English as a second language teacher, and just understanding where people are at, what they bring to the table, their belief system. I can think of people who have been victimized within the church, and and sometimes scripture is used out of context, right? And unfortunately, that happens a lot more than we like to admit, and just how pervasive it is. And if someone has a cultural norm of, we don't talk about this outside the home, it's huge. It's a huge leap for someone to come to us and admit that this is what they're experiencing or have experienced. So that within itself is key too. So asking those important questions and really holding that safe space very well. And then the bridging, how can, what tools are we doing? What, here we are today, right? So we are learning to be culturally adaptive in people's lives. And, that's key, that wherever evolving, wherever growing, we are learning, and to have the conversations with people. How can I help you? And just always being open to that, I think, within itself. But ultimately, it goes back to beginning with us. It all begins with us. And the better we know ourselves and what we've experienced and are experiencing, will really help truly and authentically walk alongside someone else.
I think also being at a point where not only understanding yourself, but you're understanding your circumstances, what may be culturally normal in one area, just even in Southern Ohio, may not be a norm across the interstate in another community. Taking those skills and making a bridge so that both communities or both norms can be shared and understood as well, and holding up a mirror to the others to be more aware as well. As you're learning here, you're also becoming a ready makeshift bridge where you go to take these skills to help others learn about other cultures and other socially accepted normal activities.
Yeah. So cultural competency is really about it's a skill. There's skills and abilities that you learn. It's developmental, right? So we continuously can grow in how we are able to understand ourselves, understand others, and then the bridging skills. And really a lot of what we're talking about today are those bridging skills. How do we learn to be culturally adaptive with folks who've experienced, harm, who have been traumatized, who are in shame, and all of those kind of things. And it does, as Karri said, it really does start with us. And whenever we recognize that, then the other pieces kind of fall. And so, here are just the 4 E's to cultural competency. They're not rocket science. They are very easy to do. So exposure, which is really just being proximate to somebody who has a different experiences or has a different cultural upbringing than you do. It's not wading into it, right? It's just being proximate to you. Ways you can do that through reading, through podcasts, through just sitting in on support groups or going to a court. Let's say if you are really in the mindset of working with folks that are justice involved, that have been victims, that are just going and sitting in court, right? Because court justice involvement is a cultural experience itself. Those kind of things. Then, education, what we're doing today is critically important. And then experience, getting in there. We're not going to get it right every single time, right? Because we're always learning and growing and developing. A listening circle, we do listening circles the 4th Saturday of every month. Those are wonderful ways to practice, to be exposed, and to experience transformative relationships and environments. So that's a great thing to do. And then empathy. I think you have to have empathy to want to do the other 3 personally, just in the work I've done with cultural competency. I think you have to have some level of empathy and wanting to understand the other person and understand yourself better before it really takes hold to do the other 3. But curiosity about yourself, about others, about learning to get better at being more impactful in transformational relationships. So curiosity is incredibly important, and reflection. Reflection, what went well, where did you see impact? What did you do to help contribute to that transformation? Where am I not doing so well? Right? What did I miss? How should I have listened better? What were some of the red signals that when I reflect on now, yeah, that was a signal. So the 4E approach is not hard, but it does take time. It takes curiosity. It takes reflection and empathy. Other thoughts on that?
One thing I think is helpful is to read good novels that really give you a perspective of other people, because it focuses on a particular circumstance, and it really deals with the emotions of being that person and what they're thinking.
Yeah.
They kind of give it to you in a way that you don't get just by reading nonfiction.
Yes. I like to watch documentaries on Netflix or things that have to do with criminal justice involvement. And and part of it is not just watching it for entertainment, but kind of digging into and trying to figure out What's motivating that person, right? How would a victim feel if they were the witness to this, right? And I think as our stories become much more rich through when we read about it or whenever we, watch something, become much more rich if we come from this perspective of trying to understand the other. It's really important. That's great, Vivian. Any other thoughts on this? And you can even go back into a situation, if you've had an experience, if you're a Stephen minister and you've had an experience where you're like, ooh, that was, you saw the growth, right, of your person, you saw the healing. What were some of the components of that? Where were some of the things that maybe got off track a little bit? So we can even go back and be more curious and reflective of things that have happened to us in the past. Where could have I shown a little more empathy then, right? It's not a guilt trip, but man, if I understood now if I understood then what I understand now, my empathy would have been a little bit higher, right? So that recognizing our own growth in those areas is important. So cultural competency and the two healing responses, they go hand in hand because cultural competency helps victim caregivers and care receivers develop both empathy and understanding for self and the other in that relationship, but also if there's a person who has harmed, right, the victim, it helps them to understand the motives of why that person harmed them. And that's really important whenever we take those steps towards understanding the why. That often is the barrier to people moving forward into healing and into forgiveness and into perhaps reconciliation. Reconciliation doesn't have to occur for forgiveness to occur, and healing doesn't have to occur for reconciliation, right? So the empathy and forgiveness, the things that can drive that are that cultural competency and understanding self and other. Thoughts on this? Karri, Jami, group?
No, I think you've hit it home very well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, just the reconciliation piece, if we could keep that at the forefront of our mind, the reconciliation between the person who's caused us the harm and the person who's been harmed, it doesn't have to occur, right, for forgiveness to take place. Or, I just think that working with others, we really need to keep that at the forefront. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah. Sometimes the reconciliation is the person within that experience with themselves and their own identity, right? So, when a victimization occurs, the hard work of reconciling that, creating a new narrative, creating a new identity, forgiveness has to be part of that. Empathy has to be part of that. Even recognizing perhaps some of the motives, some of the reasons why that person harmed them has to be part of that, but it does not have to lead to reconciliation face to face with that person who's harmed them.
There's a movie out right now. I think this is a good place to mention it. That kind of encapsulates these two concepts. The movie is called Mass, M-A-S-S. It is, or was, playing at the Marymount Theater down in Cincinnati, but it is nationwide release. And it's sitting down with two couples in a room where one set of parents lost a child at the hands of the child of the other set of parents. And working through that reconciliation was very, very impactful to watch in the movie because of the different layers. You know, they couldn't forgive or reconcile with the person who did the harm, but it was dealing with the parents that was interesting, and the communication and how things played out. I thought it was a very interesting component and example of empathy and forgiveness together.
So that's mass,
Mass.
which is short for, isn't it like mass shooting? I mean, isn't that the
Yeah.
context of it? Yeah.
That's the background, is that it was a result of a mass shooting
Mm,
at a
Mm.
school.
yeah.
But yeah, if anybody has an opportunity to watch it, watch it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let me go back to this. So assessing the right care needs. Again, each victimization is different for each person. And so, you know, what we think they might need to move forward, they may not need. So how do we get, again, below the waterline and not just focus on physical and financial needs, but, you know, that sense of safety, that loss, needing to reconstruct a worldview. You know, that's a major one right there. You know, the need to address shame, emotional and spiritual impact that has occurred in the sense of self. So I'm going to throw up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Many of us have seen this. I can't even remember I may have been high school when I first saw this. It is the old tried and true theory about how people self-actualize. And in our context, self-actualization means integration and healing, integration from a traumatic or a victimization to a better identity, to healing, to being able to be a more whole person. So if we think of self-actualization in that way, as opposed to the way Maslow originally defined it. And then in the past couple of sessions, we've talked about, you know, physical, emotional autonomy, order, equality, and relatedness as critical care needs for victims. So when Jami and I and Karri were looking at this, we were kind of like, we see a lot of connections. So we wanted you all to kind of look at these two things side by side and maybe identify where might these come into play, because not all on the left side are going to hit in the physiological needs, right? Not all are going to hit in the safety needs and vice versa. So where do you see the connectivity or the intersectionality between the list on the left and the pyramid on the right? Where might we need to address the physical, emotional autonomy, those needs in the pyramid? Thoughts on that?
The way I understand the Maslow's pyramid, and I'm not trained professional in this at all, is that you have to take care of the bottom ones before you can even address the ones higher up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yep. So if we look at the list on the left side, which ones do you think speak most to the physiological needs?
Physical safety.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And order. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So where do you think things like emotional safety and relatedness might fit?
Looks like under the psychological needs.
Yeah.
The belongingness is needing for relatedness. But I think it's also a key point for meeting a person's esteem.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah. Autonomy, and I think of autonomy and equality as esteem,
Mhm.
right? Feeling accomplishment. Equality could be as simple as, instead of us making somebody a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, that they make it,
Mhm.
right? They feel that they can take care of their own physiological needs, right? Autonomy is really important. And oftentimes in trying to meet a physiological need, we usurp the autonomy piece.
Mhm.
Okay. So Maslow's hierarchy is a great tool to use in kind of assessing, where do you start? What do we need to, where is a person in each stage of the pyramid? As Vivian said, you have to start with they have to have the first layer and then the second layer. You can't jump. So we're not going to meet all these critical needs over here on the left immediately, right?
Right.
They're going to
Right.
go in stages, just as a person moves through the pyramid, right?
But what you said about autonomy means that you have to be careful how you do it.
Yeah. Yep, you do.
Well, and so often in a church setting specifically, we're only thinking of the physiological needs. We don't think through to the higher level of security or even belongingness as quickly as we think of the basics that are needed. When often we as church members and going out to reach out to people and help people, we really need to be at the belongingness and esteem needs levels. And typically that's lacking behind.
Yep. Because how many times do people actually come to the church itself? And what we see is that their physiological needs, right? They're
Mhm.
coming because we have a food pantry. We're providing them temporary housing, all those kind of things. And so we think we're meeting people where they are. And in actuality, where they really are is needing something different. And so we have to be careful with our victims, because of all that below the waterline, that we're not doing ministry the same with them.
Mhm.
Right. And that's a challenge, because you haven't built up any trust, so they're probably not going to tell you anything.
That's right. That's right. And they're not going to tell you anything until they feel safety and
Mhm.
belonging and love needs are met. Right. Yeah. So we can't rely upon them to make the first move in indicating. We can craft environments for that, right? And not wait for them to show us that they're ready for that. We just have to craft the environments as best we can, and trust that they will reveal over time. The reveal of that should be that we have done what we needed to do, and not wait for them to show us what they need in order for us to do it. Does that make sense?
Right. Not be reactionary, but be proactive.
Correct. Yep. So another tool to use in assessing needs is the relational care ladder. This is, I actually read about this and I sent it to Karri and Jami as well, and I will send you all a copy of it from a restorative practitioner from South Africa, actually, Vivian, and she has worked with children and young people who have been through, significant oppression and things like that. And so she's a psychologist as well as a restorative practitioner. So she came up with this ladder for everyday folks like us to be able to understand, how to help people process through trauma and into healing. And I will say there are 4 structures or 4 steps, 4 rungs on the ladder: structure, nurture, engagement, and challenge. And you can't miss a rung. Okay. So if somebody has not had structure in processing through a traumatic experience, then nurture they're not going to be able to work through that, and engagement and challenge and all that. So what does this look like? So structure serves to provide those safety needs that we were just kind of talking about and that we've already highlighted: consistency, environmental aspects of it, removing to a safe location, responding in a same way as if somebody, for example, in the classroom, one behavior gets, flat out shaming. The next time that behavior presents itself, oh, here, I recognize you're, having a bad day, right? So how we respond has to be consistent in that to provide safety. So structure serves to provide that safety need. Reg signals are overactive, unfocused, overstimulated, desperate need to control situations. If trauma is not addressed again in childhood, then you will have adults that are very controlling in their environments. So those can be red signals that perhaps a childhood trauma or a past trauma has not been dealt with, and there has not been structure in doing that. Nurturing promotes awareness in a human being. You are worthy. You are loved. This should never have happened to you. So nurturing is really about that human connection. Reg signals, again, are overactive, aggressive. When we think of the compass of shame, right, there's no nurturing in the compass of shame. So they're aggressive, they're anxious, pseudo-mature characteristics, particularly in children. If somebody's acting older than or trying to assume an adult identity, that should be a red signal. Lone rangering, I'm just doing everything on my own. I don't need anybody to help me. And then compulsively self-reliant. So in adults, again, people that are lone rangers that don't feel that they need anybody, don't need community, never have felt, have not had nurturing as part of their experiences. Then engagement supports the expression of feelings, goes back to that cultural competency thing of self-awareness. How are you feeling? All of those kind of things. Again, as that saying of, I just love it. What we suppress today will be expressed in later days in greater ways. So much of lack of engagement is because we have suppressed things, and we don't want to hurt, we don't want to offend, we don't know how to say something in a way that is constructive, that is helpful and healing. So reg signals, again, withdraw, they avoid contact anxiously. They're anxious about being around people, rigidly structured, and they're very uncomfortable with others. So if we don't, again, address some traumas through engagement after structure and nurture are in place, this is kind of how things manifest. And then the final is challenge. If we think of Maslow's hierarchy, it's those top two of accomplishment and self-actualization. So it invites us to build a sense of empowerment. And red signals of that are, I don't want to play games. I don't want to do this. Again, they withdraw, they attack oneself or others. If they are engaged in something that is challenging, when they hit a wall, it's like, well, I didn't achieve this because it was somebody else's fault, right? Or everybody is against me. That's a signal that a relational brokenness has occurred in somebody's past. And people can move up and down the ladder at different times in life, and even within a single day, depending on circumstances and encounters. So this is about the relationships, broken relationships, and how they manifest in behaviors that are above the waterline. So when you think of structure, nurture, engagement, and challenge, those rungs, those are the things that are that we can use to bring all that underneath stuff up to the surface. So I'm going to just kind of continue on, because what I'm going to do then is show you how you can use the relational care ladder for short-term and long-term care. So here it is again, the ladder. So when we think of structure, what the person needs is safety. So when they're doing those, when you see those red signals come through your antenna, perhaps it's about safety. So you have to kind of figure out what is it that's going on, because anxious, right, came up in several rungs of the ladder. But if some of those other signals, so competencies that we can use and skills we can use in helping people to feel safe is organization, consistency, and order, right? Here's what's going to happen next. Here's what needs, helping that person identify next steps in the organization of what's to come is really important. Regulation. Self-regulation, getting our brain back online to think logically as opposed to emotionally. So we're going to go we're going to show a quick video on techniques for grounding practices. In the classroom, if we look at a classroom setting, when somebody is being very disruptive, the whole thing is like to remove them, but we often remove them to punish them. But, what if that removal is because we recognize that they're not feeling safe in that environment at that time. So let's get them to a place where they can feel safe. And maybe we need to soothe it down. And Jami kind of talked about that, those kind of environments. Nurturing, person needs awareness. Again, if they've withdrawn, and those kind of things. So, we talk about security in this, and that you are worthy. You are not, your emotions are valid, right? You have a right to feel. Self-worth, stress reduction, meditation. Let's do some deep breathing. Let's meditate on some things. It's getting people to feel in touch with what their body is telling them, those red signals that are going off emotionally and relationally. The restorative questions, the affective statements that we've gone over are good to help people get in this rung. Engagement, person needs, again, those feelings. It's so self-awareness is what's going on within myself and in my body. Here are some of the things you can do to kind of tap into that. But then the feelings, the joy of companionship cannot be overrated. Okay. Also having somebody know that your antenna has picked up, you're attuned to them, will help people recognize their feelings even more. New moments. What are some good things, that maybe are counter to some of the feelings that you're having? The restorative questions are good for people to process feelings. Listening circles, and then compassionate witnessing. Jami talked about that early in the trauma piece of sit and listen, sit and listen, sit and listen, validate. Those questions that were given in that are really important for the engagement. But I would say the joy of companionship. A great example of this is if you are working with somebody who may be exhibiting childlike behavior. They're adults, but they're exhibiting childlike behavior. That's a red signal on some stuff. So they might need nurturing to start with, to make them feel safe, make them feel like that they can come out of their childhood shell and move toward more adult behavior. But then engagement. So then how you engage with them may be more on an adult playful level as opposed to a child playful level, if that makes sense. So, an adult game versus, chutes and ladders, those kind of things. So maybe it's sorry as opposed to chutes and ladders. I don't know. But that's really important for engagement. It's not just sitting and talking all the time. It's doing things together. And then that challenge, that empowerment, mastery and competency. So play becomes more of a competition as opposed to just, something to do to relax, to feel joyful and replace some of those other emotions. And then competency, the challenge, again, it's not as much as the self-actualization on Maslow's hierarchy, but it's more like, again, making your own peanut butter and jelly sandwich, going to the store for the first time after a traumatic experience, learning to drive a car again, anything like that contributes to daily living that a healthier individual is able to do with just kind of almost remote learning, remote or not remote, but unconsciousness. I can't think of the word for that. Rote, like a rote action. Sometimes even our rote things of, we don't think about how we drive a car anymore. We just drive a car. But for somebody who maybe had a car accident, for example, right? Learning to drive a car again is going
Learning to walk.
Learning to walk. Yeah. All of those kind of things. So thoughts on this before we move on to the next thing? And I will send you that resource to kind of dig a little deeper into this. This is just a surface view. Okay. So one of the things, again, grounding techniques that we can use, and I'm going to just show you this short video. This is going to take us almost to time. So actually, do we want to watch this or do we want to move on? And again, I can send you this video to watch. You have, I know in the workbook, we put the four grounding techniques that this video illustrates.
I mean, I think what we've got left, Reba, I think seeing the grounding techniques done is important. I think we glazed over that last time.
Okay. All right. So we'll do that. Yep. Okay. Hold on. I got to share my sound.
Welcome to the West Ohio Conference Trauma Informed Ministry Series. My name is Rebecca Hugg, and I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Ohio. In this episode, we will practice 4 coping strategies you can use as a faith worker, and you can teach other faith workers and those with whom you're working. The 4 are mindful breathing, focus on the 5, hyperfocus, and bilateral stimulation. The first coping strategy you can use is mindful breathing. The goal of mindfulness is to bring your attention to the present moment without judgment of what you are thinking or feeling, just focusing on the sensations of your body as you breathe in and breathe out. Breathing is a full body experience. By engaging your full body in breathing, you can calm your body and your mind. Breathing, in fact, is one of the easiest ways to remember God's presence with us and desires for our life. The sound we make when we breathe in is ruach. It's a Hebrew word meaning breath or spirit. As we have been created in the image of God, we've been given a moment-by-moment reminder that the Spirit is with us and within us. To do this type of full, deep spiritual breathing, place one hand on your stomach. When you inhale, your hand should move out, and when you exhale, this hand should move in. Let's practice. Breathing in for 4 counts. Hold that breath for 2 counts, and exhale for 4. Let's try that again. Ready? Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. What did you notice? What changed in your body? Often what we'll experience is our shoulders relaxing down, our jaw relaxing as well, and our ability to breathe deeply through our whole body. The next coping strategy involves all of our senses and is called Focus on the 5. Focus on the 5 engages all 5 senses as a way to ground someone in the present moment. Grounding activities like Focus on the 5 can help our bodies realize we are safe in this space right now. First, we'll name 5 things you see, then name 4 things you can hear, 3 things you feel, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Try to be as detailed as possible when naming each item. For example, I see the rough brown tree bark outside and the tiny green leaf dangling from its branch, waving in the wind. I hear the sound of the air conditioner kicking on, making a rum, drum, drum, shh sound. I feel the stretch of my canvas shoes around my toes and heel as I roll my ankles back and forth. When I bring my wrist to my nose, I smell the lavender lotion I put on earlier today, sitting at my office desk. I still taste the dark roast coffee on my tongue from this morning's breakfast. Let's see what happens for you when your mind and body focus on the 5. So the first thing we'll do is name 5 things you see. Now name 4 things you can hear. Name 3 things you feel. 2 things you smell. And 1 thing you taste. What did you notice? Often, just like our breathing, our shoulders will go down and our bodies will become calm. The third coping strategy we'll look at comes from Dr. Rick Hansen, who has found that hyperfocus on a positive thing for just 12 seconds can develop a new positive pathway in our brain. Even in the midst of stress, if you can focus on a positive thing for 12 seconds, your perspective and energy can change for the better. Let's try it out. Bring something positive to mind. Maybe it's an image of a flower, the face of a loved one, or a sunset. Maybe your positive thing is a sound, like the laughter of a child, or the waves crashing on the beach. Do you have the positive image or sound in your mind? Now really bring out the details of what you are experiencing. Engage all 5 senses. Strengthen the image or the sound. Now keep your focus on that positive thing for 12 seconds. Take a deep breath in. Great job. What did you notice? What changed in your body? What changed in your brain? Let's recap. So far, we've practiced mindful breathing, focus on the 5, and hyperfocus. All of those tend to relax our shoulders and our jaws down and helps us know that we're safe in our bodies in this moment right now. The last coping strategy we'll practice today is bilateral stimulation. Bilateral stimulation is a way to engage both sides of your brain to help calm your mind and body. Typically, you do this through rhythm, going back and forth in a pattern. Examples of activities that engage your brain in bilateral stimulation include walking or running, tapping or drumming. The back and forth motion used in walking, moving our feet right, then left, and the back and forth motion of drumming or tapping engages our brains in a way that helps us cope with what's going on around us. Tapping, of course, is less obvious than getting up and walking or running around, and therefore is easier to use day-to-day situations. The faster you tap, the more you're trying to run through a situation or experience. The slower you tap, the more you're trying to savor something good and healthy. You can use bilateral stimulation to run through the tough stuff life throws at you, or to savor the good and healthy in life. These 4 coping strategies can be helpful for you as a faith worker, as well as things you can practice and teach with other faith workers and with those with whom you're working. I hope this has been a helpful opportunity for you to learn how to partner with folks who are recovering from trauma and how you and your team can be best prepared to serve God and to serve.
Reba, we're not hearing you.
Oh, sorry, that's because I was muted. Thank you. So I hope you can see how you can use any of those at any point in time, right? It doesn't have to be when somebody is feeling that immediate stress, right? Or you can even use, I use them oftentimes just to center before we really get into any kind of thing, right? If I know it's going to be a tough conversation, if there are going to be some emotions coming up, some hard work ahead, sometimes I'll use one of those to start with. But if any point in time when somebody, the key thing is whenever you get the signal that somebody is feeling unsafe about what they're discovering about themselves, about a situation, about you, then you can always pull one of those out and use it to bring them back to that place of safety. So, and then Jami, were you going to say just a quick word about this?
The discipline window?
Yeah.
Oh,
Or was
okay.
that me? Or was that me?
That was you.
Okay. Sorry. That's right. We took out one slide. So this is just a really good framing for your work with victims or anybody who's experienced relational harm, okay, or relational brokenness. We want to control can also mean challenge. Okay, so if we have too high of a challenge and not enough support, then it feels punitive and is punitive. If you have too much control and not enough support, again, punitive. If there's no control or challenge and no support, then we're just neglecting folks. If there's no challenge or control and too much support, then we're being permissive and we are enabling in the not so good sense of that word. What we want to have is a balance of control, support, control, challenge, and support. And that is when we are being with, and that's when we are in that restorative window. So this is just a great framework to always check ourselves with. And it's a great tool to use in that self-reflection of when there was healthy things that occurred, when there was progress made going forward in one's healing, and then when there wasn't, right? So go back to this whenever you think, I had too much control or too much challenge, not enough support. So does that make sense? So that's just a good framework for us. And then when you don't know what to say, here are some statements that you can use. And you have these in your book. They're not hard, but I would really like in our last quick minute to talk about this one. When we don't know what to say, don't say. And Jami and Karri, if you could just kind of quickly talk about these, and then we'll wrap up.
Hey, Jamie, do you mind kind of taking this one? I have my dog on her leash because my neighbors are mowing my grass and she's going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Sure,
So I
sure thing.
apologize.
No problems. These are some of those platitudes that we mentioned earlier that you just don't want to say. And unfortunately, we hear them a lot. The box on the right side of your screen are things that you've heard said and comes from the Stephen Ministry resource. But on the left side are just some basic statements that sound good, but really aren't good. And I want to skip down to where it talks about God is with you now, or God will comfort you if you pray to him. God will redeem your hurt if you trust him. God sees your pain. Though those types of statements don't help. They can kind of be off-putting. So just being aware of, there are some key terms that come across very bland and really not caring. And unfortunately, when you use God in this sense, it can come across a little unfeeling.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Because again, it goes back to, there's spiritual harm, right, that has occurred. So God is with you now. Well, where was God with me then?
Exactly.
Right? God will comfort you now if you pray to him. I have to pray to him for him to comfort me. That what kind of God?
Pray, why is now different than before?
Or God requires that of me. I mean, I thought God was loving and caring, right? So the character of God through these statements, we just have to be very careful, right? God will redeem you hurt if you trust him. Again, it's an if then, really. Okay. So if we want people to move toward spiritual healing as well, we need to not put requirements on them to receive God's love and care and compassion. Okay. So, and then again, we provide you resources. There's a couple new ones. Until We Reckon is excellent for restorative justice and understanding victims and what they really need, as opposed to what the justice system provides them. It's excellent. Our team is doing that work in this book now. And it's really helped us to think about how we can really become people of restorative justice. And then Is It Abuse is about domestic abuse and helping victims, again, from a faith perspective. And then The Body Keeps Score, Karri mentioned earlier. We also, these resources, if you want to do more of the trauma, the video we just saw, it's here on this WOC Trauma Informed Care webinars. I think it's number 4 on that. International Institute for Restorative Practices, that's where you can find more information on the relational care ladder. The ACEs quiz we ask you all to kind of talk through and do, so you can understand that better. And then Emotionally Healthy Discipleship Personal Assessment. Again, we talked a lot about our own health and our own self-awareness, and this is a great tool to use in that. And then finally, we have Saturday circles coming up this next week, actually, on victimization impact. Invite you all to participate in this just as a presence. You don't have to have experienced victimization to be a part of that, but it's one of those cultural competency things that you can do. And then I'm also doing on November 22nd, right before Thanksgiving, a Ministry Monday on listening circles and restorative practices, how you can start doing listening circles, and a little deeper dive into restorative practices, which are, again, educational tools and resources for this Good Samaritan ministry care. So we apologize, we're about 6 minutes over. Any final thoughts before we send you off? This is our last Every Second Saturday series for this year, and we will reassemble back in January for some.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, just thank you very much. This has been very, very interesting and very helpful.
Great.
I don't.
Thank you for joining us on the journey.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yes. And thank you to our silent participants as well. We are just glad that you came along the journey as well. And again, Karri, Jami, and I are here if you need anything. If you need any help or support or referrals, we always say no refusal without a referral. If you want us to, if you're part of a Stephen Ministry program and you want us to come and do a lighter session for continuing education, we'd be happy to do that as well with a group. So, all right. So blessings for a wonderful weekend and a fruitful next week. And we will see you as soon. Hopefully we'll see you next weekend at a listening circle. All right. Have a good
Peace to
day.
all.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good to see you.